Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to paint a carnation, and I'm going to show you the reference photo really quick. It's from this wonderful book. We're going to do that one right there. It's from this book called Artist Photo Reference Flowers, and I got, these are out of print, but you can find used copies on Amazon and from like small booksellers, and if I can find a copy, I'll link it up for you because I found a treasure trove of the different artist photo reference books on Amazon around Christmas time, and I was so pleased that I got them, and they're really wonderful if you can pick them up. So we're going to start off with basic shapes. Okay, so I'm going to do an oval. Don't mind any cat here. My cat likes to come up on my table and I think take naps when I'm not around. You probably can't see this too well right now, but when we add water you'll be able to. So I've got an oval. Now I'm going to put kind of like a rectangle underneath for the hip of the carnation. Remember, basic shapes. Whenever you get frustrated, go to your basic shapes. I'm going to do a small rectangle here for another little carnation bud. And do the stem down, and then I love things in threes. In this picture, the photo is so beautiful. I'm doing another rectangle here for the base of this other carnation, which is just going to have some just some petals kind of coming up there. It's like it hasn't fully formed yet. And we'll do a little bud out there. So I apologize for that being really light, but we are going to darken it, and we're going to go in with some green pencil, but the yellow is just lighter, so I know if I make any errors I can correct it. The pencils I'm using are by Spectrum Noir. They're the Spectrum Aqua Blend pencils. They're quite, inexpensive as far as like good quality pencils go, water soluble pencils. They're more of a craft company, but I have to say these have been my go-to watercolor pencils. They're not so expensive, they're precious. Like I always feel like my Albright Drewer pencils, they're just so precious, and they stay in their precious little tin and they rarely get used because heaven forbid I drop one, I might cry. So so they stay in their protected little tin, which I'm not very happy about. That's definitely a failing of mine, but these they're inexpensive enough that I'm not afraid to use them, I guess I should say. So I'm just doing some detail on the little hips, and I'm going to give us a little shape. So we're going to give this flower a little curve there, a little curve where it's starting to come up around the petals. And we're going to do that over here too. Give the little hip here of the flower. They've got these little just kind of thick, short, kind of like leaves, or just kind of like almost like, how an artichoke has those like scales. That's kind of like what's going on here, but I think they're like just leaves that haven't popped yet. I love carnations. They always remind me of middle school, because like on St. Patrick's Day and Valentine's, you could always buy carnations for your friends. Isn't it the friendship flower, carnations? I think so. I think they are. And I'll do another little bud just down here. It hasn't opened up yet. So when I draw with a yellow, I'm very conservative because I don't want to mess anything up, and then I can go in more forcefully with the green because I've got a good idea of where everything's going to be. So now what I want to do is grab some brushes, and when I'm working with watercolor pencils, I like to work with a stiffer brush. So I could use my Mimic Kolinsky, which is a faux Kolinsky, but it's firmer than my Mimic Faux Squirrel. So whenever I refer to those Mimic brushes, they are a faux fur. Or my Aqualons, which are a traditional synthetic, a golden Taklon. They just don't hold that much water, and that's kind of what you want when you are working with your watercolor pencils. So let me bring over my water bucket. So a technique I really enjoy doing is I like to wet my brush, and then I hope that's not adding too much of a shadow. I'm going to move it back just because it was making a shadow on my paper. And then I'll use the lead on these pencils. Now they have a nice thick lead, and I'll use that kind of like a pan of watercolor. And so I'm going to go in and fill in some of these shapes that I sketched. Now where I have the sketched green there from the pencil, that's going to be darker, and that's good because that's going to just almost give me like a natural shading. Now you can use any brand of watercolor pencils in this fashion. Some brands will say, oh, it's not a good idea to get the tip wet, but I think that this is one of the most versatile ways to use it, because then it's like you've got a little set of watercolors. I'd just be careful if you're going to dip the pencil in the water. I typically don't do that too often just because if you dip it for too long, you could get that wood wet, and when the wood swells, it could crack. So that's probably, you know, it's probably something I wouldn't do with my Albright drawer pencils because they're too precious, but I'm not as worried with these because they're quite affordable. And I'll link all the supplies I use in the video description so that you can find it, or at least know what I'm using, so, you know, you can shop around yourself. We're just filling this in here, giving it a base of color. Now, another thing I like to have handy when I'm working is a cut up old gift card or old credit card. And the reason I like to have that is because I can use that to get really fine lines. And it's a real big time saver too, because you could fuss around with a tiny little brush for a long time to get really fine lines, or you can scrape them with a credit card. So I always just, whenever I'm done, whenever I use up a gift card or a credit card expires or debit card expires or whatever, I just cut it up and use that in my art. So I've got this old gift card here, and I am going to throw in just some little veining here. Now, if your paper starts to dry a little bit, you'll get a lighter line. If it's really wet, you're going to get a darker line. And then you can let that dry and go over directly with your pencil. If you decide you know you want a darker line, if you go onto the damp paper with your pencil, you can get a more distinct line that's not going to blend away. So if you do this on top of the wet paper, you just want to make sure that it is in a place where you really want that dark color to remain. Otherwise, it will be difficult to dissolve it, because you're getting that pigment full strength and it's just a little bit more difficult. So for the next technique, we're going to do the kind of oval of our flower with a base of yellow. So I'm just going ahead and I'm just scribbling it in here, right off the pencil. Now you could take it off the tip with a brush like we did with the green, but I don't want to do that because I need this to be really wet. And because when we go in with our red, we're going to be using the wet of the paper to help our technique. So when I wet this, I want to kind of push the pigment around so I get the shape of those carnation petals, which is kind of pinked at the edge. You know, it's kind of ruffled, I guess is the right word. So I don't want to make a lollipop up here. I don't want it to be perfectly round. I want to get those. A little bit of movement in there. They're not super like floppy leaves because they're so petals because they're so packed tightly, but they do have a little bit of fullness, a lot of fullness, and a little bit of movement. So I want to make sure I get that represented in there, and I want to make sure that I'm leaving the paper wet for this next technique that we're going to do with our pencils. I've had a lot of requests for watercolor pencil techniques lately, so I thought this would be really fun because I didn't have anything planned today, and I know it would be a kind of a fun, easy technique to do. So now we've got our red pencil. It's relatively sharp. It doesn't need to be super sharp, but it does need to be fairly sharp. And what I'm going to do, and this is a little scary probably if you've never done it before, I am sketching in the edges of my petals because this particular carnation had red on the edge of the petals. And going on the wet paper, remember how I told you about the green to be careful because whatever you do on that wet edge is going to be super bold. Well, I'm using that quality of this product, watercolor pencils, for that particular purpose because I know it's going to give me that beautiful pinked carnation edge. So I'm just going to go through here and sketch on my petals. So you got to really make sure you're not fussy. If you're afraid of this, if you're afraid you're going to make a mistake, you don't have to work on the best quality paper for this because you're not doing a lot of scrubbing or lifting. You can work on your cheap practice paper. It's absolutely fine. This is a Strathmore greeting card. I love to kind of practice and play on these because I can just send it away when I'm done. You know, I don't have to keep it forever, and then I can brighten somebody else's day with it. So there we've got our little edges, and we can go in and scrape with a credit card scraper and get some veins. You got to do that while it's wet. I'm going to try to keep my hand out of the way, but sometimes it gets in there. Sorry about that. And it's just going to give us those subtle veins that we want. Okay, we'll come over here to this guy, make sure that he got a little attention. And then this one down here. And if you don't have, you can always Google like images. If you don't have this book, you can look for carnation photos online, or there's wonderful websites where you can find public domain images to use. But I just love these books so much. I urge people to keep their eyes open for them so that if some come available, they can snag them if they're not too expensive. I got most of mine between $5 and $30. Most of them were between $5 and $15, honestly, and then I did pay a little bit more for some of them. And now I thought for some darker shadows, I'm gonna grab this deep blue pencil and I'm gonna just kind of do some shadows. I'm gonna pick up the color from the tip of the pencil because I don't want anything too dark. I want to be able to control it a little bit. This is also a good technique if you want to put a background in too. But I think I'm probably gonna leave this one just the way it is. A very easy beginner tutorial here. Have fun with it. We're only using a couple colors. If you have just a standard set of watercolor pencils, you should be able to follow along with the colors that come in the set that you have. Most basic sets would have a yellow, red, and green, and blue. We're not using anything too fancy. And I think I'll go in with a little more green. Now you probably would want to go over to the edge of your paper, or not directly over your paper to do that, just so you don't end up with any splashes of color that you might not expect. I like to kind of put it in a little bit of a patchy format so I get a more of a loose look. And then I'm going to do the same with some yellow. So I generally will not go back in and draw on the paper if I have gone and wet the tip, because then you get kind of, you'll get some dark lines and some light lines, and it's kind of unpredictable. So I kind of will save this technique to the end a lot of times. And one more thing I really like to do when I'm doing projects like this is I will do some spattering. I just think it really is playful and fun, and it gives a very light-hearted feeling to a quick watercolor card like this. And then you can let it dry and send it to somebody you love. And I think that's really thoughtful. I also like when I flick color down like that, if it lands somewhere where the paper is still wet, then it kind of gets soft. Like I might just wet a little bit of the area, wet a little of the paper here and there, and then flick some color in, and then I'll get some really pretty soft splashes that look nice. So let's do that with the red. Let's see how that works. Yeah, that's pretty. I like that. You don't have to do this though. Some people absolutely hate splattering, and that's fine. You don't have to do it. Remember, it's your painting. You do whatever you want to do, right? Make it however you want it to look. There, and if you do want to do any scraping, if you see any areas that are wet, you think could use a little attention, go ahead and scrape it in there. And then when it's dry, you just sign it, you're good to go. It's a lot of fun, and you can also, when it's dry, you can redefine some of those edges. You can even go in there while it's a little wet too if you want to. But try not to overdo it because it's fun, it's easy, it's a beginner watercolor pencil tutorial, and I hope that it helps you break those pencils out of the box and be a little bit less timid around them. I want to thank you so much. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please give me a thumbs up, and if you're new here, I'd love it if you hit the subscribe button. I have a lot of beginner tutorials as well as intermediate and advanced watercolor tutorials on my channel, so go poke around and create something really fun today. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.